Hello everybody, my name's Zahir and I want to welcome you all to my channel Plants and Paints, where today we're going to be talking about the Philodendron Verrucosum. The reason we're covering this subject today is because I put a vote up on my Instagram account. If any of you are unfamiliar with my Instagram account, it's Plants and Paints, so plants underscore and underscore paints. If you're not familiar with my account, pop over there. I post lots of rare tropical aeroids on there and things from my personal collection, as well as things from my shop. So as I mentioned, due to a vote I put up on my Instagram account, the Philodendron Verrucosum won that vote with over 100 votes actually coming in for that particular plant out of 3 plants I think it was that went up for vote, and in total over 200 votes come in. So for those of you who voted, I want to thank you so much for participating in helping choose this video for today, and let's get started. So what we're going to do first is I'm going to give you just a very basic brief introduction into the Philodendron Verrucosum itself, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about the plant, giving you a description of the things that I personally find give it such a great allure. But before I get started on that, I'm just going to show you the plant itself. I don't have a huge specimen myself, I just have a cutting which I've been rooting here for about 3 weeks now, which is doing really well actually. But this is the Philodendron Verrucosum, and based on the coloration and the introduction that I'm going to give you, you'll be able to relate that to what I'm actually talking about. So this is my guy here. It's been rooting for about 4 weeks, as I said. In fact, what I'll do, I'll quickly pop it out and show you how well the roots have been developing on here. So as you can see, it's pretty well rooted after 3 weeks, I think it is actually, and it's doing really well. And I actually have decided to keep this one for myself, because when it first arrived it only had this one leaf on there, and in 3 weeks it's producing its second new leaf now. So it's growing so vigorously. I thought, you know, during the period of the growing season, I want to see how much this actually grows itself. So it's been added to my collection, although I am going to source myself a more mature specimen, so this eventually will go into my shop for sale. So as I mentioned, I'm going to do a brief introduction to the Philodendron Verrucosum and talk a little bit about its origin, and then I'm going to go into a description of the things that I personally find fascinating about the plant before we move on to the care and maintenance side of it. So the Philodendron Verrucosum is a species of flowering plant in the family Araceae. The Verrucosum is native to the rainforests of South America and can be found growing in a diverse amount of locations, which include Costa Rica, Panama, Colombia, Ecuador and Peru. So there are several factors of this plant which I personally believe give it its great allure, such as the leaf blades, which on the surface have a beautiful array of different shades of green, ranging from light lime green to a very dark green appearance, with the color transitioning from light to dark between the veins of the leaf. And with the veins being so prolific on the surface of the leaf, this transition in color you'll find is quite frequent. At the top of, and to top this off, it has a velvety and somewhat silky texture to it. And looking under light, you can actually see a silver sheen to the actual surface of the leaf as well. So it's got many attributes that make it very fascinating to look at. All the things that I've just described, I'll just show you on the leaf itself. I don't know if you're picking it up there, but you can just about pick up the silver sheen that's on there, and also the transitioning from the dark green to the light green, which occurs in between each of the veins of the leaf. And as you can see, the veins on the leaf are quite prolific. So that is just talking about the surface of the leaf itself, which I think is a beautiful place to start on this particular plant. I mean, the surface of that leaf is quite unique in comparison to other types of philodendrons that you're going to have. So the allure of the leaf doesn't actually stop there. So the underside of the leaf has a beautiful maroon colouring also, which on a juvenile leaf can actually be seen through the leaf under medium lighting. So in here you can actually see it under the leaf, but that's the maroon colouring that I'm talking about. And as the leaf matures, that maroon gets darker and darker. I'm sorry I don't have a more mature specimen to show you, but unfortunately I'm just working with what I have today. And as you can see on the juvenile, very juvenile leaves from young plants, not mature plants, the burgundy doesn't start off straight away. It's something that will develop gradually, and as the plant starts to mature and starts to produce more growth, that maroon will become more prominent, like in the new leaf that's starting to emerge here. I mean, you can see the burgundy on the underside of this leaf that's emerging is quite more pronounced than it is on the original leaf that the plant arrived with. So on top of that, you've also got the setose or bristled petioles of the actual plant as well, which is another factor that just gives this plant even more allure to it, because it's something a little bit different. You know, you're not always going to find a plant where the petiole is bristled, and the bristles on the petiole range from a light green to a silvery, almost white appearance the more mature it gets. And to top that off, the petiole itself actually, as it begins initially, it's a light green color like this, but as it matures it becomes like an orange to burgundy color. So as you can imagine, that light green coloring of the bristles on the petiole against a burgundy background, it's just such a pretty plant. Really, really pretty plant. I think it's something that, you know, as an aeroid collector or those that collect aeroids, providing you get a decent specimen, it's definitely worth giving one a try if you haven't already got one in your collection. One word of warning I would give at this stage is that they're a little bit tricky when it comes to rooting. Either they'll take to it or they won't, and you might be left for months trying to root the plant, whereas some of them will just take to rooting straight away. Like I mentioned, this particular one, as you saw earlier when I pulled it out of the tub, I'm sure I did in this cut of the video. I hope it was this cut, because this is my second cut. The roots in this are very well developed. It's developed very quickly. In 3 weeks it's pretty much half filled up the pot that it's in. Now, just based on the fact that it can be a little bit finicky when it comes to rooting it, I wouldn't say that, you know, it's reason to give up on the plant. Sometimes these, unfortunately, they can take a couple of months to take off as far as rooting is concerned. But as I mentioned, you might get lucky, you might get a cutting. If you end up with a cutting, that roots pretty quickly. So also the Philodendron Verrucosum, it is a climbing plant. So what you're going to find is that you'd be better off to actually provide this with a moss pole, because as it grows and it matures, it becomes quite a weighty plant. So you're going to find it's going to start leaning over and growing in a horizontal fashion. There are several downsides to that. Number one, most obvious, is that it's going to put stress on the plant, and you might end up with so much stress on it that it actually breaks its main branch that it's growing from. So obviously, to avoid that, try and give it a moss pole to climb up and let it sort of adapt its normal growing pattern. In nature, you'll find that these are growing up trees and, you know, along the branches of the trees, and trying to get as high as they possibly can. And also, if you let the plant grow horizontally, I can't explain exactly why this is. This just seems to be quite common in quite a few of the aeroid blogs that I've read concerning this particular plant, that if it grows in a horizontal fashion, the leaves won't reach their full potential. So to keep it upright is going to benefit you by getting the leaves to the bigger size that they can potentially reach whilst it's in your care. So do try and give it a moss pole or something to climb up once you notice that it's becoming too weighty and it's starting to lean over to a side, and you'll find it to be a lot happier if you do that. And because of the type of plant it is, being an aeroid, and the fact that it climbs trees, it produces aerial roots which will attach themselves to the moss pole, so it will sort of anchor itself to it. So once it's started anchoring itself, you haven't really got much to worry about. It pretty much will take care of itself in that aspect. So that is a brief introduction into the Philodendron Verrucosum. So what we're going to do now is we're going to move on to the care and maintenance. But before I do that, I'm just going to go over the leaf again, the plant again rather, just to show you what we've just talked about. So the petioles, as I mentioned, as they mature, they take on a burgundy colour. I don't know if you can really particularly see it in this image, but this particular petiole has started turning quite burgundy, and the setose, or the bristled petiole, the bristles on there, as you can see, are light lime green, and they've almost got a white to silvery appearance as well to them. And obviously you've got the underside of the leaf, which is just that little extra niceness to look at, if you like, where it's got that burgundy, and under the right lighting conditions, I've got a light shining straight on me, you can actually pick up little hints of that burgundy through the leaf. And then you've got the silver sheen and the velvety and somewhat silky texture of the actual leaf as well. So I think there are many reasons why individuals might find something that they like in this plant. So it's going to cater for a lot of people's whims as far as what you want to get out of a plant, and this ticks a hell of a lot of boxes, to be honest. Also, I don't think particularly you would find it hard to find one, because they are quite common in the trade as well. So if you were to buy a mature specimen, I think it's a good starting plant, other than things like the clarinervium and things like that in the aeroid family, which are also quite prolific within the trade and generally quite affordable as well, whereas some of the aeroids that you can buy end up being quite expensive. So another good plant to start off a collection with. And providing, like I said, if you're new to it, providing you're buying a rooted specimen that is already producing growth and rooting quite happily, then you shouldn't particularly have any problems with it. So that's my little introduction to the Verrucosum, a little bit about where it comes from, the area that you can find it in, and the things that I find particularly alluring about the plant. So what we're going to do now is we're going to move on to the care and maintenance. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about lighting. So due to the Verrucosum's native growing environment, which mainly consists of the rainforests of the Andes Mountains in South America, where you will find it attached to trees, growing up trunks and branches, as you can imagine, it likes a somewhat lightly shaded location and a cool environment. So providing it with an indirect light source should help to avoid any potential issues with the plant, such as burned leaves, or putting the plant under so much stress that you end up potentially destroying the plant. So a bright indirect bright light source would be ideal for it. So keeping it away from windows. If you've got a section off to the side, like for instance just behind me, behind my window, there's the section on the side there, that is what I would consider to be an ideal location, because it's bright enough there but it's not in any direct sunlight. Also there's good airflow there. With aeroids, it's very important to make sure that you keep a good airflow around your aeroids. They do thrive in an environment where the lighting and the airflow is taken care of and taken into consideration when you're keeping these kind of plants. So that's the lighting. What we're going to do now is we're going to move on to the potting mix. Now, with the plant that I've got, because I've been rooting it, I've rooted it in sphagnum moss. I generally will root plants in either sphagnum moss or water propagation, but this particular plant I chose to root in sphagnum moss because it tends to take better to being rooted in sphagnum moss rather than in water. What you'll find in water is that the roots can rot pretty easily as they're developing, whereas in sphagnum moss they're not constantly submerged in water, but they have a ready available amount of moisture, as well as being very aerated, which I think helps to develop those roots quite quickly. And as I just showed you, within a 3-week period from that cutting basically having next to no roots, I've managed to fill up pretty much half of the pot there. So I find if you're rooting a cutting, then it's good to start off with sphagnum moss, keeping it in indirect light with good air circulation, and the sphagnum moss helps to keep that air circulation around the roots as well. And if you've got a more mature plant, then what I would suggest as far as the potting mix goes is that the Philodendron Verrucosum likes a well draining potting medium, but one that will retain adequate moisture. So my recommendation would be, as a potting medium, would be to add the following potting mediums to your mixture. So starting off with orchid barks, perlite, horticultural charcoal, a small amount of good quality well draining potting soil, and a handful of sphagnum moss. Now what that will do is it will create a well draining potting medium for you. At the same time, it will be able to retain an adequate amount of moisture so that you're not having to water it on quite a regular basis, especially during the growing seasons, like particularly in England at the moment. We're in the mid to higher 20s and we've not even arrived in summer yet, so I can imagine it's going to be a pretty hot summer. And if it was just housed in sphagnum moss, then being that it's quite a thirsty plant, you're going to end up watering it every day or every other day. And if you've got that throughout your collection and you might have 30, 40, 50 plants in your collection, you don't want to be watering them sort of every day for every single plant. I think I've probably got about 50 plants in my collection. I've had to narrow it down a little bit because of the plants that I bring home for the shop have made things quite cramped in here, so I have reduced my personal collection for that reason. But pretty soon we are going to actually move into an office space, and I'm then going to build my collection back up again, because I do like having lots of plants around. But if I've got 200 plants in my living room on top of my collection, I've got quite a small living room, it gets a little bit overcrowded. So the shop space is coming in the near future. We will add that to videos, and we will film in there as well. But for the time being, because everything is staying in our homes, we can't really particularly well, I particularly can't keep a huge collection because there's nowhere else really for me to put it other than my living room. So that is the potting mix. So orchid bark, perlite, horticultural charcoal, good quality well draining potting soil, and a handful of perlite, just to ensure that it's well draining but is able to retain a decent amount of moisture, just so that you're not watering it every day and that the roots get to stay consistently moist without drying out in between waterings. It's quite easy to monitor a growing medium like that to make sure that you know when it does need to be watered next. So based on the fact that we're talking about watering, I think what I'll just move straight on to watering now. So watering your verrucosum correctly can be a key part to maintaining a happy and healthy plant. Make sure to keep your potting medium evenly moist and don't allow the medium to dry out, ensuring that your plant has a readily available source of moisture. So when watering your plant, ensure that the water you use has been left to get up to room temperature as water that's too cold is going to damage the roots of your plant and send the plant into shock, which can damage your root system as well as prevent further growth below and above the substrate. Also, when watering, please ensure that you try to use either rainwater, bottled water, deionized water, or filtered water. This will ensure that you're not introducing any harmful elements to your plant which can have devastating side effects. So for instance, myself, when I water my plants, I always use filtered water because I live in flats, which you can see from my window behind. I don't have the liberty of collecting rainwater, although I would absolutely love to do that for my plants. You know, it contains lots of natural elements that would benefit the plants, but I have overhanging balconies above me, so the rainwater that's coming down is usually dripping from somebody else's balcony, then somebody else's, then down into mine, and God knows what that's bringing with it, so I tend to not want to use that. So I filter all my water in a filter jug. I generally will leave it for 24 hours, making sure that it's at room temperature and giving it a good opportunity to get rid of any harmful elements that are in there that the water filter didn't happen to get rid of. Although, as I've mentioned so many times, the water filters, they proclaim that they get rid of 99% of anything that's in the water. I believe them. I'm just a skeptical person, you know. If I know I can do something extra to make sure that that has happened, then I will do that. And if leaving the water there for 24 hours makes me feel a little bit more comfortable, then that's what happens. The water stays there for 24 hours before I actually end up using it. So that's the watering for your Philodendron Verrucosum. What we're going to do next is we are going to talk about temperature. So to get optimal growth from your Verrucosum, you should be providing temperatures in the range of 15 to 21 degrees Celsius, which will promote regular and vigorous growth. It will, however, tolerate temperatures as low as 12 degrees up to 30 to 32 degrees Celsius. Although your Verrucosum enjoys a somewhat cooler temperature, keep it away from cold breezes, as this will burn the leaves, stunt growth, and if not monitored, in a worst case scenario, it can actually cause irreparable damage, which could end up leading to the death of your plant. So if you want your plant to grow quickly, as I mentioned, you want to be keeping it in the range of 15 to 21 degrees Celsius. That is the optimal growing conditions for the plant. So with that in mind, what you're going to get is you're going to get shorter gaps between the internodes, you're going to get larger leaves, you're going to get a faster growth pattern out of it, but failing that doesn't mean that it's going to have detrimental effects. I mean, you can take this down to as low as 12 degrees Celsius during cold winter nights, I suppose, and up to 32 degrees during the summer. It will still happily grow, it just won't have that vigorous growth that you would notice as it's just starting to warm up and you're getting into those early 20 degrees. So keeping that in mind, if you want your plant to grow quickly, which is what I've been pretty much focused on with this, as I mentioned, I've had it for 3 weeks, and in the 3 weeks it's grown these 2 new leaves here. Second leaf is just on its way out, and I think for a 3-week period, for it to produce 2 new leaves and a huge root system, I'm just proving my point by keeping it within that temperature range that it does work, and it will grow vigorously for you within that range of temperature. So that is the temperature, and what we're going to do now, and finally before I go into an outro, if you like, is we're going to talk a little bit about humidity. So your Philodendron Verrucosum loves a humid environment. So as you can imagine, coming from a tropical rainforest environment, it's going to be very humid in there. It's surrounded by trees. Places like that, they create their own ecosystem, which means that, you know, they're going to have, it's got its own climate, if you like. So it will be moist inside the forest, where outside it might be quite arid, or it might be quite warm with very little moisture in the air, but in the forest it's going to be warm with a whole ton of moisture in there. So based on its natural growing environment, I would advise that you try to keep the humidity quite high, although it's not something that's 100% essential with this plant. As I mentioned earlier, this is a plant that, if you're a beginner and you decide to get one of these, providing you've got a well-rooted one, you shouldn't have too many problems, providing you're keeping that humidity around 60%, even 55 at a push, 50 to 55. That is your average room humidity temperature, humidity level anyway. So 60 and above would be preferable for the plant, and things that you can use to raise your humidity is things like a humidifier. I keep my humidifier running 24 hours a day. I generally have it set at about 70 to 75% humidity, although this particular plant is kept quite far away from my humidifier, so the area that it actually is living at the moment is about 60 to 65, fluctuating between there during the days. And as you can see, it is quite happy in that amount of humidity. But saying that, the more humidity you provide it, the happier it's going to be, the less likely it's going to have its leaves drying out on you, the less likely it's going to be becoming stressed in a particular environment where something else is not quite right. The more things that you do to provide it with its natural growing environment, the better off that it will be. Now, I can imagine there's some people sitting watching the video thinking to themselves, but I keep mine in this and it has no effect on it, or I grow mine in a different medium and mine grows fine. I just want to point out, due to some of the remarks that I get on some of my videos sometimes, that this is my personal experience, and I'm sharing this with the people who are here that think that they can benefit from it. And if you're doing it different and it works for you, I'm happy for you, and I think that's great. You know, I'm just here giving information that I don't particularly find that other people are doing. So the response that I generally get to it is that I've been helpful to people, and I'm giving people the confidence to be able to keep these kind of plants, which is the aim of what I do in the first place. So, you know, if you do something different and it works for you, I think that's great. You know, this is just based on my own personal experiences, not everybody's experience or how everybody else does it. So please don't be offended if you do something different and you feel like I'm telling you to do it differently. I'm not telling you to do it differently. I'm just saying that this is what works for me. And because I keep quite an array of plants, like I said, on average at the moment my personal plant collection is about 50 to 60 plants, but at any particular time I might have 250 plus plants in my living room, and my methods work across the board for pretty much all of the plants that I keep. So if it works for me, I'm sure it's going to work for other people. And as I mentioned, to me, this is just about giving people that confidence to be able to go and buy these kind of plants, which are considered rarer in a sense that you can't go and find them in your average garden centre. You've generally got to go and look for them through people who import them, and the odd websites where you're able to purchase through people who supply these kind of plants. So that is basically what my videos are based on. Sorry about that little ramble there. I just thought I would mention that because, as I said, I do get the odd few comments which can be a little bit off-putting, to be honest, because at the end of the day I'm doing this to benefit people who are not as confident keeping them, whereas I'm quite confident keeping mine. I have generally no issues keeping them, and my success rate is generally quite high. I rarely have anything go wrong. So this is for those people, to give them that little bit of an edge to make them feel that, okay, yes, I can do this. I don't have to worry, because for those people who do keep aeroids, they know that this is quite an expensive hobby to have. This is not your average garden centre plant where you're paying £5 or £10. You know, some of these plants can range into the hundreds of pounds, which, you know, if you haven't got the confidence to keep it, and you want to get into this and you're just lacking a little bit of knowledge, and that knowledge is not available to you, then you're missing out on such a great hobby. And this is why I make these videos, to give those people the confidence to go and join in this hobby, get involved with the plant community, keep these harder to source and rare plants in your collection, and have something different to talk about. You know, when people are coming to your house and they're used to seeing the kind of plants they keep at home, which, as mentioned, they're buying from their garden centres or IKEA or wherever it is they're picking up their plants, and they come to your house and they see a whole array of kind of things that they've never particularly seen anywhere before. It makes a huge conversation point, and the way that people can get interested in this hobby is they've only got to like plants to enjoy something different. And I think that, you know, this is something that needs to be shared more with other plant keepers. So, you know, if you've got the confidence, you share that confidence with other people, which is what I'm doing. And I've had such a great response in general from it, that people have contacted me, left messages, contacted me through Instagram, telling me how much they enjoy the videos and how much it has benefited them and given them the confidence to be able to keep these plants. So for those people, I'm very grateful that you're tuning into my channel, and I'm glad you're enjoying the content. I really do my best to make sure that I give you the right information, and without making any mistakes, or try not to make any mistakes. I'll spend a couple of days generally researching the videos that I do before I actually put them out, so that the content is fluent and it can be matched to most other information that you can find on the internet concerning that particular plant. If I make mistakes, I'm sorry. I'm quite happy for people to point that out if it is based on a mistake that I've made. You know, I will go off then and further research that, and obviously if that ever was the case, I will put an apology in any of my videos to say that I made a mistake here. I want you to be aware that I have done that, and I have corrected that mistake basically. But so far I generally haven't had that. I've just had people sort of saying to me, oh, you do it this way but I do it that way, and what you're saying is wrong because my way works for me. Well, you know, I'm glad it works for you, it's just not the way that I do it. So again, sorry for my ramble there. I am getting way too carried away with that. So what I'm going to do before I end the video is I'm going to say thank you to everybody who has tuned in today. My video today is based on a vote that was put up on my Instagram page. For those of you who are not familiar with my Instagram, it's plants_and_paints. So plants and paints. On there I post very regularly my collection, also the plants that are sold through my shop, and just general updates on things that I'm up to in my life as well. So if you're not familiar with my account, I'd love to see you over there. I'm always happy to answer any planty questions, plant related things. Feel free to send me a DM through my Instagram, or even contact me on YouTube, and any way that I can help, I'm always happy to do that. I very rarely have come across a scenario where I've not been able to answer a question. And if there are people who have sent me questions and I've not got back to them, just send me a question again. That, more than likely, if that is the case, that's probably due to the fact that I get hundreds and hundreds of messages from people asking for a particular type of help because they might be having a problem here or there with their plants, and I get inundated with them, and I love answering the questions. And if I miss you out, I'm sorry. Please just send that question again, and the odds are that the second time, if I missed you, which is going to be very seldom, I will get back to you. So yeah, thank you for everybody who voted for this video on my Instagram. If you're not aware, I put up votes on my Instagram on a fairly regular basis to ask which plant care and maintenance video people want to see. There were 3 plants in this care and maintenance selection, and the Verrucosum one, I ended up with over 200 votes, which I think at this stage was the most votes I ever received for one of my videos, and the Verrucosum actually had over 100 of those votes. So for all of you who voted, whether your plant was the winner of that vote or not, I want to thank you all for participating in that. I really appreciate the fact that you're taking your time out of your day to come over and place that vote so that I can get my next video out to you. Thank you everyone for tuning in. I hope you've enjoyed my video.